Yeah. Halloween is basically fully outlawed here. Like, we can't
Ooh.
even put out candy for people to take.
Really?
Yeah. So we are now eating all of our Halloween candy.
Oh no. And here come the cavities.
Yeah. Well, I don't have very good teeth to begin with, just like genetically, which is annoying. But yeah, so I've been eating a lot of Starbursts and they're so good.
They can't stop. Favorite Starburst?
Red. Cherry. By far. It's
Pain.
not Nick's either, but it's great. It's like the olive thing in How I Met Your Mother.
Oh,
It means I get the red Starburst.
I love that episode. No, reds are a close second for me. It's the pinks.
Pink is good. That's my second, probably.
No, it has to be the pinks, and I think least favorite is orange.
All right, friends, Future Jenna here, jumping in once again with our trigger warnings. So these are just going to be for the book we are discussing, but there are some pretty serious ones, so just bear with me just one moment here. In this book, there are some pretty in-depth discussions on kidnapping, murder, gun violence, mistreatment and injury to children, including hitting, electrocution, drowning, all of those really crazy types of things, as well as discussion and description of suicide and description of torture. So if any of those are going to be triggering for you, again, I know those are some pretty intense ones. Please keep that in mind. And if this is not going to be the episode for you, maybe skip this one. But if you are going to be okay with those, or if you've already read the book, then let's jump on into the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our book club style podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dana.
And I'm Jenna.
Two high school friends reconnecting for the joys of reading. Now, our tastes and opinions on what is a good book may vary, but sometimes we just might be on the same page. Now, let's find out if we are.
Yes, and welcome back. Welcome to our book discussion for the month of October. I remembered what month it was this time. Doesn't usually happen. Warning for anyone listening, my brain today is just not all there. But before we get into our big discussion for the month of October, Dana, go ahead. Looks like you're all ready. Start us off with what you're drinking.
So, sorry, YouTubers. So because we had joked that we were definitely both going to be set on alcohol today. And then I started with just a coffee because I actually had to get up really early to finish the book this morning.
Shocking to nobody.
Not because of that. I was actually just having a hard time reading this one. We'll get more into it. But then Jenna looked at me and was like, I have wine. You're getting something. So I went in the fridge. And
well, it wasn't that. I said, I have the largest glass of wine.
And if I had just my coffee, it would have just looked.
It's like, what is that GIF? I want to say it's Amy Poehler or someone, but it's a GIF of someone with like
just the giant wine glass.
Giant glass of wine, like a small child size wine glass, like lifting it up. So I was prepared to look like that basically if you just had coffee.
Yeah, so I have now a cherry cider. It is Titan Cider Works, Washington State brand.
We're both very tired.
Yes, we'll have the energy for this episode. We're definitely both going to have so much fun talking about this book. But it was just the fact that I stayed up till 2:30 in the morning trying to finish it, started to fall asleep near the climax. So then I told myself to get up early just to finish it home. I got done about an hour before our recording.
He did. Yes. I was keeping tabs on him while I was working this morning.
I will say she was happily surprised when I said I'm in the home stretch. She goes, how many pages? 100, 150? And I said 57. She goes, good.
I did, because I was ready to like slap you silly, basically. I was ready.
No,
so I was impressed.
I was 115 pages at 7:30 this morning, finished about noon.
Gotcha. And then we've already discussed, but I have red wine today. I've worked on making the switch for autumn and winter. It's still much too hot for me to be drinking red wine, but my husband turned down the AC for me because I really wanted my red blend today. So I'm very on theme for spooky season. I want to share. I have red wine. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's in a Witch Creek Winery glass, so it has a cute little black cat on it.
And I like the pour line with the cat.
Thank you. And then my shirt, stand up a little bit so you can see, but it says which way to the wine.
Oh, wow.
And it's spelled witch like WITCH, and it has a cute little witch on a broomstick. So I am ready for Halloween.
All right. So
do you want to start us off reading the back cover, and then I'll talk about the publication info?
Yeah, I'll read it again. So if people don't remember, for our October read, it was Stephen King's The Institute, his 2019 big novel.
I guess I can do the pub info first. I usually do. We're going a little out of order. So like he just said, this month we read The Institute by Stephen King. I can hold it up here. For those of you who can see it, the cover looks like this.
It is a very pretty cover. I do love it.
It is beautiful. I love the color scheme. It's kind of a like jewel tone type color scheme, which I think is really pretty.
I don't know if it's there for the paperback, but on the slipcover for the hardcover, it kind of has like a holographic shimmer to it.
Oh, nice.
So it really shines.
On his name, it does a little bit, but not a ton. Okay. But for those of you who can't see it, it is basically a night sky, nice like red, purple, beautiful looking, with a boxcar right in the middle. That inside the boxcar, it's set up to look like a bedroom, and outside of the window, it looks like daytime. So it's really crazy looking. And sitting on the bed is a little boy.
This is the first time I've really focused on the cover, even now after reading it, and now it's just all hitting me back. I was just like, oh, now this all makes so much more sense. And I
love doing that when I'm reading a book, like trying to go back and figure out
see it all now
where the cover kind of ties in with things. That's just a weird behind the scenes thing into my mind when I'm reading a book. But this one is published by Gallery Books. And then, like Dana said, it was initially published in 2019, just last year. And then I had the paperback, you can see. So this one was just released this year, 2020. And my paperback copy had 576 pages.
And mine was 557 on the hardcover. Which and we figure out, I don't think maybe there was anything extra. Was there anything extra on the back of your?
There wasn't. If you listened to our check-in when we were talking about it, initially I was saying that maybe when they re-released it as a paperback, they had put discussion topics or book club questions or something like that in the back. Sometimes when a publishing company is re-releasing a book, they will do that. They didn't. It's probably just because, if you just look at the size, like compared to my hand, it's a smaller size than yours.
Yeah, so it just maybe.
And so it's probably just, there was more like run on to next pages and things like that.
Yeah, so let's go into the flap. In the middle of the night, in a house on a quiet street in suburban Minneapolis, intruders silently murder Luke Ellis's parents and load him into a black SUV. The operation takes less than 2 minutes. Luke will wake up at the Institute, in a room that looks just like his own, except there's no window, and outside his door are other doors, behind which are other kids with special talents, telekinesis and telepathy, who got to this place the same way Luke did. Kalisha, Nick, George, Iris, and the youngest of them, 10-year-old Avery Dixon. They are all in front half. Others, Luke learns, graduate to back half. Like the Roach Motel, Kalisha says, kids check in, but they don't check out. In this most sinister of institutions, the director, Mrs. Sigsbee, and her staff are ruthlessly dedicated to extracting from these children the force of their extra-normal gifts. There are no scruples here. If you go along, you get tokens for the vending machines. If you don't, punishment is brutal. As each new victim disappears to back half, Luke becomes more and more desperate to get out and get help. But no one has ever escaped from the Institute.
Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so we talked about it at length in our check-in episode, but do you want to kind of give a SparkNotes type length version of why we chose this one?
Yeah, we chose it because obviously for October, we wanted something horror or darker themed. We had settled on one book, but I kind of thought maybe let's try something that I thought personally matched more with the theme. So I suggested Stephen King's The Institute because one, I had it, and two, I hadn't yet read Stephen King yet. I have a bunch of his classics, but I have just not gotten around to reading them all. And I had this one for a year. I bought it right before I went to Germany, and I said, let's just do this one. It's Stephen King. He's known for horror, so that can be the tie. Is it's a Stephen King story. Let's do it. And yeah, that's the Spark Notes.
Perfect. And so, kind of tying in what we did last time with Bromance Book Club as well, I want just a one sentence. Did we like it? Did we not like it? And then we'll go into the more in-depth discussion.
Okay, so
that was a heavy sigh.
I gave Jenna a lot of thoughts ahead of time, but on these last 110 pages and a little bit before that, my thoughts on it fluctuated.
And I just want to say really quickly, I don't know if we are going to split it into 2 episodes, again, like we did with you, or if we're just going to keep it 1 episode, but we will try and leave all spoilers towards the end of the episode or until that 2nd episode.
Yeah.
But just letting those of you listening know there will be spoilers later on. So if we split it into 2 episodes, great. Otherwise, I will, in the description, in the show notes, put the time that we start talking about spoilers and the time that we stop.
Yeah.
Just wanted to throw that in there while you were talking about the last 100 pages of the book.
My thoughts of it, the first 2/3, boring.
Yeah.
The last third, quite entertaining. Until then, also the last 20 pages. So for me, this was disappointing.
Yeah, so I knew going in that Stephen King isn't really an easy read, even if it's going to become your absolute favorite book ever. It's just his books don't tend to just kind of flow easily into your mind. They're not fast reads.
No.
And it wasn't, which is fine. I ended up liking it, but I didn't like it a ton, where it's just kind of, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't fully find myself enjoying it. At no point do I feel like I really got drawn in to the book the way that my favorite thing about reading is when I just really get lost in it. I didn't find that happened at any point in this one.
This is the first book, and it is only our 3rd read, but this is the first book that felt like homework to me.
It did. Yeah.
It got to that point where I had to push and push. And my plan had been during this week, I was like, okay, I have a week left to read it. I can do that. And I was not even halfway through the book at the beginning of this week. I was still within the first third. And then each day I'm like, okay, everything off, TV off, phone on the table, somewhere else, just focus on the
distractions.
And it was just so hard to stay in it. And so I will, as we get more into it, I will say that I feel like a little past that 40-page prologue, which I have a lot to say about how that all tied around. That was ridiculous. It gripped me when it focused on who we were supposed to be focusing on.
Mm-hmm.
But then not until about a little after halfway did it start to grip me. And then it just kind of wrapped up. And then the epilogue pissed me off.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel a little bit like, and this is going to be a really weird thing to say about a book that in chapter 2, a little boy's parents are murdered and he's kidnapped and taken to this crazy torturous place. Crazy thing to say about this, but I feel like nothing happened in the first half of the book.
Nothing happened. I
And
exactly think the same thing.
which was just, again, in that half of the book, his parents are brutally murdered. He is kidnapped. He is taken to this place. He's started getting these injections, these tests, all of these like really terrible things. But it
These
just,
somewhat torturous things.
yeah, in the book itself, it felt like nothing was happening.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty slow reader in general, but this book, it was kind of weird in the sense that it was a much slower read for me, not in the sense of I wasn't enjoying it, so I put it down and didn't pick it back up, or in the sense of I wasn't understanding it maybe, so I was rereading portions. Nothing like that. It would take me half an hour to read 10 pages. It just, I don't know if it was because it was just feeling really thick or if it was because it felt slow. I'm not quite sure what like psychologically was happening in my head that was causing that, but it just,
Same boat.
my words per minute that I was reading was just way down.
This last 110 pages with it, I had to time myself. I started right at 7:30 reading the last bit of it, and then I checked my phone and it was an hour later. I had read 30 pages in an hour, and I was like, okay, now I know I will finish it before we record, but this is still awful that that's how slow it's taking me. So what I feel about this book that will, when I get more into my details, is it is 557 pages. For you, a little bit more than that. It is over 500 pages. This concept could have easily have been a 300-page book. And I just ring back to something you said on one of our past episodes. Stephen King just likes to talk. There are paragraphs.
And I wouldn't even cut it in half. If we're saying just overarching, this is a little under a 600-page book, I would say I would have vastly enjoyed it more if it was, say, 400.
At the most, yeah, 400. No? It would have been better because it's the pacing. It's the pacing of this book. And like you said, it just doesn't seem to move because as the flap says, I love this concept. Kids with telepathy or telekinesis being abducted to be experimented on. It gave me X-Men vibes. The book has a moment where it references X-Men and I cheered. I was like, yay, just exactly what I thought it would be. As
soon as I read that, I closed the book and I put it down and I was just sitting there like this, like Dana's going to bring up the fact that they briefly mention the X-Men.
Well, because the thing is, it's very...
he did. I win.
Because I think it's what he intended. He wanted a kind of dark X-Men take or something is what I felt with this. But the first 40 pages is this prologue about a drifter that has nothing to do with what the flap talks about. And then we get to Luke Ellis.
It almost feels like, so you had said that in the check-in too. I want to give just a little bit of background on that chapter. And we're not going to, this episode, go through and basically say this happens and then this happens. And then we're not going to give a full synopsis. But basically this character that you're following in this first chapter that, like you said, does feel a little bit like a prologue, he's this former police officer who is on a flight to New York, and I don't remember, is it a government official? Someone very official looking needs on the flight last minute, and
it's like not Secret
Service. It's like a government official.
It's who they put on planes. The officers they always put on planes.
Oh, okay.
It was like they needed a seat.
But anyway, and someone very important and official looking desperately needs on this flight. And so they won't leave, or the flight won't take off until someone gives her their seat. And so he basically, on a whim, decides to get off the plane. He gets a pretty substantial chunk of cash in exchange for his ticket. My brain is mush.
No, yeah, it was because they said, hey, we'll put you on the next flight paid by us. We'll give you a voucher for whatever hotel you stay in and you'll be set. And so he just finally stands up and something told him to just go like, you know what?
Just kind of said, why not? Like, I have this sudden feeling to do this, and starts hitchhiking to New York instead and finds his way to a small town.
Yeah, he
to
asks
stay there.
himself to reimburse the ticket instead and makes his way to this town.
Yeah,
And
and just decides to stay there. So this first chapter itself almost feels like it is setting the book up to deal with the idea of fate. Like, is it fate that he ended up in this small town that, spoiler alert, obviously, because we're hearing about this happening, part of the story with Luke and the children ends up in that town as well.
mhm.
And so it almost seems like it is trying to raise the question of fate. If it is like, was I meant to be here for this? That kind of thing. And then that never really comes back.
No, because when that drifter character does come back into the story tied to Luke and the other kids, it's at the beginning of the last third. All of a sudden the
Mhm.
paths cross and you're like, "Oh,
And this is when things really start happening. This is
yeah.
like, I don't want to say climax because it lasts almost through that last third of
Yeah.
the book. I would say about 150 pages of the very end, it slows back down again.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say climax, but that's when it just really starts going and
It
starts
starts to
feeling like things are happening.
move, and you're right, the whole fate thing, because even then they do kind of they do say fate, was it destiny and all of that, but they bring it up for like 3 pages and then let it go again. And it's like,
Yeah, the book isn't only told through Luke's perspective, so you're seeing his name's Tim. I'm not going to keep calling him the
oh, the
drifter.
drifter, Tim.
I'm not going to keep referring to him as that. It's so much longer than Tim. Um, but so you're not just getting Tim from the boy Luke's perspective, you're getting inside his head and getting his thoughts as well. But it's not even 3 pages, I don't think. It's like a couple of paragraphs where he
Yep.
basically says, oh, I wonder if maybe I was, what does he say? He compares it to chess because Luke is basically a child prodigy. He's a
Yep.
genius and he plays a lot of chess throughout the book. And so obviously that is a big like metaphor in the
Yeah.
book, is this chess game. And Tim basically says, like, maybe I was supposed to be a part of Luke's chess game. I know that I'm not the king or the queen, but maybe I was a knight and these other people were just pawns. And then
Yeah.
that's it.
Yep.
And then
And
no
the thought's
more
over.
mention of the fact that he is in this place with
Yeah.
Luke.
And so with that, my big summary of the pacing is, it's like we have Tim's prologue, and then we have 2/3 of Luke and the other kids in the institute being tested on.
Mhm.
And it's just over and over again, because I'm going to try and stay on the whole pacing thing, but it's like all of these ideas, Stephen King had ideas, but then didn't have full thought out answers to everything. And so he kind of just tried to give a reason. And so it's like we have all these tests, and these tests don't feel important. It's like he tries to make a mystery behind them, but then it's not a mystery I'm interested in following. I feel like the answers are kind of given to me, but there's supposed to be a bigger secret behind even those answers, and I didn't care. And then the book does an exposition dump to explain everything.
There is a huge exposition dump.
I
It's basically the last chapter is, and we're not going to go into detail
no.
about that quite yet, but it's basically sort of an epilogue without saying it's an epilogue. It's not
Right.
like 2 years later, it's like
No.
2 weeks or something, but someone that you've never met before, but who is a part of the Institute you've just heard about,
Spells out.
comes and is literally like, this is why the Institute. This is why you were there. This is what you were doing there. This is our goal. Here are my life dreams. Like,
And that's the thing is,
so
it went
much information.
well, because what I like about Stephen King is, and I've seen this in his other books, is how he writes is he does like big title cards that are like sections, and then there's like chapters within each of those sections, and chapters
So,
break.
like, the second portion, when we finally switched to Luke, was called The Smart Kid. And then there were
Yeah,
chapters in there before it switched to something else.
yeah, and it's like
Which
12
I love.
chapters, and it always restarts on the new section to chapter 1, and I really like that. And this one was this final section was only like no, it was six. It was six of those little chapters. But the first one, this expedition dump section, not expedition.
We are
exposition.
having trouble with words today. This is going to be a fun episode to
the
listen
exposition section
to.
lasted like 20 pages.
It was so long.
And then it went to chapter 2, and I was just like, it's lazy writing is what it was. Is I feel like this book could have had this amazing mystery, because you want to know why they're there and what's the point. But I think
it would have been more interesting. Again, Luke is so brilliant. He is so very smart. This 12-year-old kid is smarter than I will ever be, probably. Like, just a genius. And he found out so many things while he was in the Institute that he wasn't supposed to find out. I think it would have been so much more interesting if instead of having this formerly unseen character come and just explain everything and basically make a bullet pointed list of all of the reasons and justifications and everything. I think it would have been so much more interesting if we had been able to see Luke figuring it out and doing research once he was out and kind of putting puzzle pieces together instead of being shown the picture.
Yeah, it really is almost like, I don't know, like Luke had a crossword in front of him and like he couldn't get half of it. Like maybe he had 3/4 of the crossword, but he just can't figure out what these last few words are. And then someone comes over with a pen, fills it in for him, and then brings out another crossword and fills out the whole thing for him. And it's like, here you go. And then you're just kind of left there like, there it is, done.
It is kind of like that where, again, I think that maybe not everything, but I think most of what this character tells Luke in the end, Luke could have done some research and figured out. And there were even a couple of things where when the man said it to him, Luke was like, yeah, I kind of figured that was the case.
And I'm like, when did you think this was the case?
Yeah, you never
told us, the audience, that Luke thought this was the case.
And I just, I'll say about half of the things that the man tells him, I think Luke could have done some research and figured out on his own.
Well, because even this character,
and it would have been so much more interesting for the reader, I think.
This character is probably the biggest part of the mystery. You hear about this character, you want to know about this character. He's
basically the evil Charlie from Charlie's Angels. Like you never see him, you just hear about people referring to him.
And you hear about one thing about his being as a person, one tiny little detail, and then he just drops there at the end and says, well,
which I think was really interesting because it did make him very mysterious and very ominous. Like nobody at the Institute, Mrs. Sigsby, the headmistress basically of the Institute, doesn't know anything about him except that he's this man that she calls and makes reports to, and that he has a lisp. That is all anyone in the entire book knows about this man. And so it made the little bit of character that he was at that point really interesting and really creepy because you knew nothing about him. And then he literally shows up at the end, was like, hey friends, let's talk about the Institute.
It was just the whole book, I just feel like had wasted space, had some wasted time. It was repetitive because of the whole testing section. Like the tests were, and I will say, like, I think as we kind of said, it's more like sci-fi, not horror, this book. And
yes, I don't think we said that once we were recording.
Right.
But I would not classify this as horror at all, which Stephen King lately, like the past few years, from what I have heard from friends that read him pretty consistently, hasn't really been writing horror as much. He's much more in sci-fi. I almost wouldn't consider this a thriller either. I would, just because of the like the material and the situations. But there were only about 2 or 3 chapters that really like felt tense.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The horror in this is some of the things that happens to the kids or things that are said to the kids, because the tests are brutal, and how they
Yeah.
treat the kids, it's awful. These are people, if I knew these, I mean, these people exist out there in the world, of how they see kids, it just disgusts you. And
Hmm.
there was, I think, one line that, like, I'm not a prude whatsoever, but it was kind of just like, I don't think that needed to be said. And
Yeah.
it was the it was the one of the horrible things, as they make as sort of a torture for the kids, when they take the kids' temperature.
Hmm.
These kids are, 10 to 16 years old.
The youngest is 8, I want to say.
Right.
They take about 8 to 16-year-olds.
And they take temperatures like a pet rectally. And I'm like, oh, that's horrible. But
With all of the technology that is
that
in
we
this
have.
place. Yeah.
And the guy, when Luke's getting his temperature the very first day, or the first testing day, the guy doing it says the line as, "Hey, just know that as long as only one of my hands is around your hips, you should not be concerned." And I was just like,
Yeah, it's something about
dude.
your oh gosh, what does he say?
He
Because he
says,
refers to it as a something virginity, but I don't remember.
right. And so I was just like, I don't think
And
I
like
needed,
your virginity is intact or something.
right.
And
And I
it's
was like, I don't think I needed the child rape innuendo in
no,
this at all. Like,
like even remotely.
you have these people who are already being awful to these kids. I
Mhm.
didn't need a 40-year-old man to joke that he would rape the child.
That was Zeke, I think, wasn't it? So he's
Yeah,
supposed to be pretty young.
or
He's
it was maybe Zeke, or one with a
um
C. I don't know. There's so many
but
caretakers that are assholes.
yeah, I think
That was the one time I really cringed, and I was like, I don't know if I could keep going.
yeah, and that's early. Strap in, folks. Um, no, but it was interesting because there were quite a few moments like that in the book where it seemed like Stephen King was trying to show how just plain evil these people were. Like there's nothing redeeming about them. They are just evil. Like later on, uh, one of the other women that works there who has been just terrible throughout the entire book, the kind of head of security is asking her basically, if it comes to this, will it be possible to poison these children through the air ventilation? And she smiles, and the line that describes it basically says something along the lines of, and then Gladys smiled and this time it was genuine, or something like that.
Right, because
So
she's always described as putting on a fake smile for the kids, and the
yeah,
one time her smile is genuine, it's when she wants to murder them.
so I feel like there were so many of those little moments where it was kind of like, these people are just evil, like there's nothing good about them. And then at the end, the lisping man shows up and is trying to be like, but we're doing good, and is trying to like
Justify it all, and
justify all of these acts and all of these people. It's kind of like going to Disney. Everybody loved Maleficent as a villain because she was just so evil, and that's what made her so just great as a villain, because you loved to hate her. And then Angelina Jolie becomes Maleficent, and they give her this tragic backstory, and she's actually been helping all right the whole time. Like that's very much how it felt, and it was just a huge eye roll moment for me.
yeah. And so it was just like I and we're kind of getting into like the characters now. So I will say that, like, I love the interactions between the kids' relationships with each other. That was what kind of kept me reading. Is I
Mm-hmm.
loved who Luke became friends with, because it's Luke, and the names that it mentions: George, Nick, Iris, Kalisha, and Avery. Those are kind of the main, like, 5 or 6. There are some others who have some standout moments or impactful moments, but that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the crew. And you do end up liking all of them. Nikki's the tough kid who won't take no shit. Kalisha's kind of the calm one that Luke has a crush on.
She's kind of like the cool girl at the
Right.
institute.
George is the wisecracking,
Yeah, he's the
Chandler.
class clown smartass, which
uh,
was he was funny. I liked him.
Iris is kind of the, the calm, sensitive one. There's Helen, who's
Hmm.
like the punk girl.
Yeah.
And so it's
I
it's
forgot
like
about Helen.
it's a great Breakfast Club crew, and you
It is. It's
love
very
them.
much that, where they each kind of fit into, if they were, excuse me, they're all different ages, but like
Yeah,
if they were all in a sixth grade class together, you would know
right.
exactly which archetype each one was.
And then Avery's the youngest. He's 10, but they say he acts like he's 6 to 8, like he has a younger
Mhm.
mindset. And he's just the innocent little kid that everyone wants to take care of as like the baby brother.
Yeah.
And but he may be the most powerful of them with their powers. So I love those relationships. And as we said, they just try to make all the caretakers evil minus one, Maureen.
Mhm.
And it's just Stephen King hits the nail over the head over and over of like, these people are awful, bad, they deserve to go to hell. That line's thrown around so many times. And
Yeah.
it's just
Hell is a
like,
huge thing in this book. I wouldn't say
yeah,
that religion is necessarily, but
no, but
hell
hell,
is,
yeah.
like
and
just as a place.
and it just became a bit much. And so like where we said it feels like it doesn't move is that Luke keeps going through the tests, interacting with friends, going through tests, interacting with friends, and then
Mhm.
not until one thing happens or switches, something big with Luke happens, and after that the story actually is moving forward, and it's not till the
Mhm.
last third. And I just found that very disappointing on such a big book that, like I said, almost felt like a a proto X-Men epic, just fell flat to me.
Yeah.
And the big thing that it's about kids with superpowers. These kids didn't even need to have superpowers. I wouldn't have noticed. I felt like it wasn't important
Yeah,
until that
it
last
wasn't
third.
important until the very end,
And so,
really.
because you're wondering what is it they want the powers for, and the first time it hints at it is kind of halfway through, but what you think is a hint is actually them telling you, and then you just have to wait till you see what's behind the door of what that looks like. Like they do tell
Right.
you halfway through, this is what we're doing with them, and you're like, oh God, what does that look like? Is that going to be the horror of this book? And then you see it, you're like, it's not scary, it's just sad.
And yes, and there are some horrific things and horrific moments in the book. Like Dana mentioned, the line with the caretaker talking to Luke while he was taking his temperature,
Yep.
and the thing at, ooh, that was, my wrist just popped. I need to stop talking with my hands so actively, I guess. Um, and the thing with Gladys smiling at the end, like there are descriptions of how they're treating these children, descriptions of when Luke's parents are killed, descriptions of so many things that we can get more into in a bit that are just really difficult to read. They it,
it,
it's so hard to read and intake and think about.
it
And
was it was as if Stephen King, where he felt he needed to get detail, because I've read books where it's like, there are books when you read it and a story moves and you're gripped in because of the story, and they don't get detailed. They're the type of authors who literally in like 4 pages can paint a picture, but you're not bored of that picture. Like they take
mhm,
4 pages to describe just the smell and the look of like maybe a road sign or something like that. And
yeah,
so authors who go really detailed. And I feel like Stephen King was doing both, where he would do the quick writing for the story beats, but when it came to the torturous or the parts that were supposed to be the quote unquote scary, awful things, that's
yeah,
where he went really detailed because he thought that's what would make it more impactful. And it just kind of felt like very heavy handed.
yeah, and it made it difficult to read.
Yeah.
Like the one that I'm sure we will go a little bit more into later. On the back cover, when Dana read that, it mentions there's front half and then there's back half.
Mm-hmm.
Back half is where a lot of shit really hits the fan. Like that's where stuff really starts to happen to these kids, more so than just the tests. But then there's also a back half, or they call it Ward A,
Mm-hmm.
where basically once these kids aren't kids anymore, the only thing really left of their mind is their powers, they go here. And there was so much description of what that looks like for these kids and what the environment looks like. And things like that. And just like I said, I wouldn't count this as a horror because it didn't scare me at any point. There were only
No.
one or two parts where it even felt tense or like I needed to keep reading to see what happened in order to kind of classify it as sci-fi thriller rather than just sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it is just the subject matter, but those moments like these really, really deep, almost unnecessary seeming descriptions were just,
Right.
they made this book really difficult for me to read.
Yeah, and I felt that I got to a moment where once I hit it and I felt that because I was expecting dark moments like that, but
Mm-hmm.
when I even cringed at a part, I was like, oh no. I was like, I think Jen and I are both going to be on the same page on this one.
Yeah.
And it's just going back to the characters, like, because that's the section we're kind of on, is it's just it's it's a book that I feel like had so much wasted potential with the story itself, but he did such a good job with the characters and their interactions and those
Yeah.
moments. Even the villains have great moments when they're talking together because as we talked about the kids and their friendships, the two main villains you deal with are Mrs. Sigsby, the headmistress of the place, and her right-hand man, Stackhouse. What a name,
Mm-hmm.
Stackhouse. And
Who
he's
is
like,
the head of security we had mentioned.
right. And he's supposed to be like this hulking guy who will not take any lip or shit from a child here.
Yeah.
And even their interactions, like, even though she's older and, you know, you hear he's kind of like middle aged, you almost get this hint that there's a slight, the smallest relationship there or anything. And
They've been working there together a long time, you can
right.
tell. And so even if there isn't any sort of like outside of work relationship,
Hmm.
they are very close and
He's
they
the only
share a lot
one
of trust.
He's the only one allowed to call her by her first name, Julia. That is
Hmm.
said. And so that's what paints that picture. And so the caretakers, there's so many that you can't get all the names. But, and this will kind of also go into, because I was about to say, Stephen King really likes to make sure you know the last names of every single character. I found it funny.
Well, I don't think that that was Stephen King necessarily as like wanting us to know as much as it was
Right.
a story choice. Luke, once he basically these tests that they're running in front half are trying to see if the kids that come in with telepathy can be tested and kind of prodded to get telekinesis to come out of them as well and kind of
Hmm.
pull that out of them, and vice versa to see if the ones that come in telekinetic
Can
can
you
also.
can you dip your toe in both?
Yeah. And so once he kind of is able to do that and is able to learn a little bit more about these caretakers and the people in the institute through that little bit of telepathy, he makes sure he knows first and last names for all of them
Well,
for when he goes and tries to tell his story. So I
well,
think that
that
was more Luke than it was
Well, in that section,
for
I'd agree.
us.
Yes, it's just in the even in the beginning when the kids introduce themselves, I don't know 10 or 12 year olds that feel the need to really announce
Again,
their
I
whole
think that was
name.
story-wise more than anything.
I just found it weird. It was
Once
weird to me.
Luke, so this book is very, very difficult to talk about without talking about spoilers because things start happening at the halfway point. So I will say this, and then we'll maybe go into favorite characters, and then we'll go into our big spoiler
Yeah,
warning and go more in depth. Um, but Luke does end up getting out, and
and
pretty early. It's
that's
at the
at
halfway
the
point.
halfway point. So
Um,
it's not really much of a spoiler because the rest of everything can't happen unless that moment happens.
right. And so, again, I think the kids all saying their first and last names, I think it was more a story choice. Uh, Again, all of these kids have been stolen away from their families and they don't know what's happened to them. They don't
Yeah,
know if they're alive or if they're not. And I think partially it was the kids kind of connecting back to the family that they might not have anymore. But then partially, I almost said Nick, once Luke is out, he is able to say, I have first and last names of these
yeah.
kids. I know that my parents are dead. If you look them up and their parents are also dead, this is enough to start an investigation.
I guess I can get behind that
I think it was
that
just more
reasoning
to drive
behind
the
it.
story forward.
It was really weird in the first beginning because I'm like, kids don't really care to give other kids their last name, and so it felt really weird. I guess this kind of just ties to my thought of, if you got this feeling, because we kind of talked about something like this in our previous reads, the kids, Luke, it's explained because he's a genius, sounds older because he's smart.
Mm-hmm.
All the other kids felt like adults in the way that they talked, in the way that they acted, even some of the younger ones. And it felt like Stephen King's writing is a little outdated.
It just felt like maybe he doesn't know how kids talk anymore.
Right.
It's
Because it is modern,
so,
because he does reference Trump being president in this book. So we know it's
yes,
modern day.
there are pop culture references and
Yeah.
things. But yeah, the kids, we'll just put Luke aside because he is very much a special case. And I could see a child like Luke talking in the way that he does.
It makes sense for Luke.
But kind of just putting him to the side for a second, the kids didn't really talk about, or didn't really talk like real kids today. And I think almost more than anything, it seemed a little bit like that forced nostalgia. Like if you're watching something like in the 90s, you were watching that 70s show.
Right.
Where in the 90s, the 70s were really big. And so they were using all of the 70s lingo. Obviously that's not quite the same with this book, but it seems like maybe his mindset when he was writing was that.
Well,
because a lot of the what am I trying to say? Catchphrases isn't the right word. What am I trying to say?
Pop culture references?
No. Slang. A lot of the slang that the kids use is really outdated.
Mm-hmm.
And things that, again, Avery is 8 years old. And I think Kalisha and Nick are the oldest, and I want to say they're 13. Like,
I think Nick is 16.
I know Harry, whatever his name was.
Harry was.
I know he was 16 and he was older than Nick. So maybe Nick was 14, 15. But either way, like, these are words and phrases that these kids would not know in context. Like if I went up to a 10-year-old today and said groovy, they would look at me like I sprouted the third eye. Like, and I didn't write down any specific examples, but there was a lot of that.
I wrote down two that was word choice that even I was like, I've never heard of this. Like one that was obvious was covers, like on a bed, he called coverlet. And they kept referencing as like nightstands next to the bed as bureaus. And I had never heard of that.
Bureaus is definitely an old person word.
And I was like, kids don't say this. I was like, this is not a kid's word.
But I want to see if I can find them. But there were, it almost seemed like maybe I don't know much about Stephen King's life, like outside of writing, if he has kids that were maybe born in the 90s or something. I don't really know anything about him, but it kind of seemed like maybe the most recent interaction he had with actual human children was in the 90s.
Right.
And that was the experience he was writing from.
Yeah. And so it just felt very odd because all these kids felt like adults. And I was like, that's how my dad has told me he and his friends would talk when they were younger, but that's not how kids today talk. And even as you said, the pop culture references, some of the pop culture references these kids make, I was like, I don't even know what that show is. How would you know what the show is? And I was like, there's no way that a kid found this anywhere, knew this show and referenced it. So it just after it was probably maybe the first third, I had to get used to that writing style and that language, because I was like, okay, obviously he doesn't know how modern kids talk. So I'm just gonna have to accept that somehow these kids have a very strong language.
Like this, I can't find any of the slang. I know that there were a couple. I just didn't write any down. But there were a couple that were very outdated. But like they're talking about candies and things that they can get at the Institute as treats. And partially it's they have access to whatever the Institute has, so maybe it's the adults picking. But George, one of the characters, is dreamily talking about Cracker Jacks and Ho-Hos, which just like those are not things that kids
Cracker
eat anymore, really.
Cracker Jacks I had as a rarity as a kid.
I think I've had Cracker Jacks once in my
Right.
life, and I got them from a Hollywood Video when I was renting DVDs and
Yes,
VHS
they
tapes.
were always at Blockbuster. That's where I would get them.
So just things like that. It seems like maybe he is not hip with the kids or
No.
whatever the youths are saying these days. Even I'm not. I couldn't write a book about kids
Right.
these days, really.
No. And that's the thing is, it's like, I can't, like, I don't want to make it seem like we're harsh in this book. It's that there's a lot of things that just don't add up and make it flow well. And it's all these different things. Because like I said, the last third, when things start moving, I actually really enjoyed that last third. That's what helped me finish it so fast, was the story got moving. There was some action in it. And and the two paths crossed. The Tim, the drifter at the beginning, finally came into play. And I feel like even he could have been a more mystery thing, because he's a guy that Luke's not sure if he can trust him. But then he kind of trusts him really right off the bat after like a page or two. And so I feel like that,
I feel like that wasn't the least believable thing for me.
no, but I feel like that could have even been a little bit more of a, like, building the anxiety and the desperation and all of that. It could have added a little more to the weight with Luke in that moment, but I could tell that Stephen King realized he needed to kind of wrap things up and get things moving. So it was just kind of like, all right, we got to go. So
he was like, oh gosh, I can't have a 1,000-page book.
no.
So
favorite
really
character.
Quickly, that's where I was going to go. Let's say who our favorite character was and just a quick why, and then we'll give our spoiler warning and go into kind of the meat of that last half to a third.
Favorite character, I will have to say, it was just Luke at first, because it's the only character I could, he's the main character.
Yeah,
He's
I mean,
the one
you're inclined to be more attached to the main character.
He's the one we really follow. But in that last third, Avery grew from that annoying little boy who needed a big brother, big sister, to a strong hero. And so I will say that because Luke is the character we follow the most, but Avery, I felt, had the biggest impact near the end of the story. They're kind of even, but I just loved kind of that jump Avery took. He suddenly became wiser at 8 years old, wiser and smarter and more powerful, and became kind of the person who's like, we're going to do this. We're going to get out of this. Yeah. And I'm going to take the charge.
Avery was my favorite character too. He's the one that I wrote down.
Because even when he's...
And it's kind of, he starts almost like a Piglet character, where he's like the little one. He wants to be a part of things. He's so excited to be a part of all of it with his friends.
When he gets bullied, he's always crying as the first reaction, and very, very timid. And
I mean, like you said earlier, he is 10, but his room at the Institute, to match his room at home, is covered in like SpongeBob and Nickelodeon posters. And
G.I. Joes on the desk.
G.I. Joes, and so he just, maybe because of his powers, hasn't mentally matured quite as much as the other kids his age that you might expect at that age. And so he is a little bit of kind of this Piglet character, where and Luke is the Winnie the Pooh, where he's kind of following Luke along. He sleeps in his room a lot of the time. He wants to be a part of things. He wants to help Luke as much as he can, but he kind of needs that direction. And then once Luke leaves, Avery steps up and almost becomes the Christopher Robin. Like, he's in charge at that point. Just, he decides, because I think you had mentioned earlier, Avery coming into the Institute before any of the tests or anything, his powers are stronger than any of the other kids. And so I think once Luke leaves and he's on his own, he kind of realizes that and is like, oh no, wait, I can be in charge. I can help us do things that we need to be able to do. And so he kind of steps up, and I really enjoyed him. I liked him a lot.
My favorite moment, I'll say, because it's like we said, we know that Luke leaves, but it's, Avery was kind of helped in that and was a part of the plan to get Luke out. And so he's kind of interrogated, and there's a horrible torture happening to Avery, this young kid, but Avery stays strong. And you would think that, no, this kid's going to break, and then that's how the story is going to move forward. But this kid, 10 with the
Because if you've read a book or seen a movie ever, you know that they have to find Luke.
Right. Or be on his trail somehow.
Yeah.
And
just
so
because otherwise the story will not move forward at all.
And so it easily sets up that Avery will just crack because he's so fragile, but he doesn't. And I was like, Avery. And so that was the turn and the switch where I was like, all right, Luke, you need to step it up. Avery's whooping you as my favorite character right now. And so, and Avery's just sweet. I loved because even when some characters that we love start to move to back half and start to leave the scene, they say, watch over Avery. He's going to need that. And Luke becomes the big brother to him. And they have actually some sweet moments. Like Avery sleeps in his bed with him and Luke's like annoyed by it, but eventually loves the company. And those two as a set are great.
Their relationship, I think, was the strongest part of the book.
And that's what kind of kept it, is because then it eventually became Luke, Avery, following the two characters, and it became back and forth, like, okay, because Luke's gone, we follow him, okay, but back at the end's to Avery. And that's when it picked up, and I felt this, and I feel like if just Stephen King had realized that earlier on and had that dynamic, it could have been so much better in its whole 557 page run. But it just felt like a lot of it was wasted time to get to that with, like I said, the repetitive tests. Luke keeps going through tests and it seems like nothing's happening with those tests. And then finally, when he bonds with Avery, I'm like, here is content.
And then I will save my favorite scene for once we're in our spoiler portion, just because it is basically one of the parts of the very end. And so I will go ahead and say our spoiler warning is officially in effect.
Yay. So if any of you are going to check out Because of So, thank you for listening. If you're deciding to go in because maybe what we've said before has turned you off from the book and you don't care, so
or
you
if
keep
you've
on
already
listening,
read it.
Or that too. So I'd say, are we on the same page about this? Yeah. We're both just iffy with it. It was...
So overall, would you recommend it? And if so, who would you recommend it to?
I don't know if I could, just because, like I said, there are great highs, but I just feel like the highs weren't enough for it. I feel like the highs get weighed down by the padding and the rest of it. So I couldn't recommend it. If you're a normal Stephen King fan who reads everything he's got to read, sure, go ahead, add it to your library. You probably have already read it or planning to read it anyway. But as someone who wants a good, engrossing, kind of like dark story, this isn't it.
I'm kind of the same boat, maybe just a little bit to one side. I would say, obviously, like you said, if you are a huge Stephen King fan, you've probably already read it, but if you haven't, go for it. It is, for the most part, a pretty compelling story. It's just pretty slow, so just kind of prepare yourself for a bit of a long read. I would say if you are someone that pretty consistently reads pretty thick fantasy, like you are really used to kind of long-winded, for lack of a better term, that's not necessarily the kindest term, but that's all I can really think of to describe it right now, but kind of long-winded story building, setting building, and then character building. A lot of background in some places and setting a lot of the scenes, really descriptive parts. If you pretty consistently read fantasy, you would be pretty used to a lot of that, in my experience with fantasy. So if you're looking for just some darker material, this might be a great book for you. But I think that if you go into this kind of, not to speak for you, but kind of like you did, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you go into this expecting this is going to be like a scary movie, but on pages, I think that this might not be the perfect book for you. And like I said, I don't remember which episode it was, one of the recent episodes, not every book is going to be for every person. And there are books that I really don't like that are very highly reviewed on Goodreads or on Amazon, and vice versa. There are books that have an average of about 2 or 3 stars that I just really loved. So if the story just sounds really enticing to you, please read it. We're not telling you that you shouldn't, but these are our thoughts. And maybe would I tell my friends who like true crime to read it? Maybe not. It's much more of a sci-fi read than it is a horror or even a thriller to me.
I would say, I mean, look, like we said, we looked at the online reviews. Majority of people seem to like it. So maybe just for us, it wasn't our cup of tea.
Yeah.
Maybe we're the outliers. So
And like I said, it's possible that this is just telling me Stephen King is not my guy. And that is totally okay. And so that, might be part of it, is I just don't really mesh well with his writing style or something. Just like with people, maybe you go to a party and meet 10 people, 4 or 5 of them you won't really get along with. It's the same thing with books and with authors. It's possible that maybe I just don't get along with him and his writing style.
yeah.
So yeah, if it sounds interesting, I say go for it. Just prepare for a bit of a long read. But if you're not already drawn into it, I would say maybe it's not the read for you.
Yeah. So with that, yeah, we're on the same page of it just being kind of an iffy book for us. But yeah. So you want to tell them where they can find us?
I sure will. Let's wrap us up. You can email us anytime at thesamepagepod@gmail.com. Again, that'll be in the description in case you don't know how to spell anything, but it is just the name of the podcast for the most part, so should be pretty self-explanatory. If you have any books you think we should read for the podcast, any questions, collaboration requests, or if you've read any of our upcoming reads, like once we announce our November read, if you've read it and have questions or discussion topics that you would like us to include, go ahead, leave us a comment, send us an email. We'd really like for you guys to be a part of our discussions with us, if at all possible. And then if you want to reach out to me specifically, you can find me on my blog, which hosts all of my full reviews, my tours, anything that I do collaborating with authors and publishers, couldn't think of the word, at tacklingtbr.home.blog, and as well on Instagram at tackling_TBR. And then as for the podcast, you can find and connect with us on Instagram at The Same Page Podcast, on Twitter at The Same Page Pod, and can find us also on Facebook and YouTube just by searching The Same Page Podcast. And then, as always, the last thing I'm going to say is if you are listening to our show and you like what you hear, please consider heading to Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you're listening to us. If it's on YouTube, or maybe if by the time you're listening to this, Amazon Music is working, wherever you're listening to it, and subscribing, giving us a positive rating, and leaving your thoughts in a review. It's a process. It really only takes a couple of minutes, but it really means the world to small shows like us and helps us get introduced to more bookish folks.
Yeah. And so we're Stephen King, The Institute. Very interesting read. We're very excited to announce our November book come our next check-in with a extra surprise with that announcement as well.
Make sure to keep an eye on our Instagram just in case we announce it early. We might for this one just because it's kind of a special book discussion episode. But either way, that check-in episode will go live November 15th.
And then December, we will hopefully be our first month of trying to do 2 books. October didn't go so well because this was a little bit of a long read, but I am officially going to be starting 2 books for November. So if I get that done, prepare for more episodes.
Send any well wishes for fast reading or also threats to our Instagram. Again, that is at The Same Page Podcast. And I will make sure he sees them. Even though I run the Instagram, I don't know why I'm saying that. Send them anyway. I will screenshot them and send them to Dana to encourage him to read many a books.
All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.